Welcome back to Tabletop Titans and another Titan Tactics. There has been in recent years a huge push towards competitive 40k. Now, we here at the studio love to play competitive 40k, but I'm here to tell you why it's a bad competitive game and why, frankly, we play it anyways. Stick around to find out, and of course, if you do find this video to be useful or entertaining, go ahead and hit that like button down below, subscribe to the channel. It really does help us grow and see what y'all like. Warhammer 40k is an incredibly imprecise game, and this is a big boundary to it being a truly competitive game. We as humans are responsible for measuring individual minutiae of measurements between tiny little models on a very imprecise scale. This inherently is going to create inaccuracies in the game that other games don't have. For example, in esports, all of this is managed obviously by the game engine itself, and it can track into the individual minutiae exactly where everything is when something happens, etc., etc. And so this is something we obviously don't have in the physical world. In sports, they resolve this by having many judges on every single game. This is something that you can do at top tables, of course, but at your average table, we just simply don't have the number of people required to actually make sure that this is done correctly. And frankly, it would probably be a huge problem. So very imprecise. This also comes down to the wording of the rules. We're also the interpreters of the rule. Same thing, in esports, you have the game engine is the interpreter of the rules. Whether or not they're correct, it will make a decision. And this is something that in 40k, the humans are responsible for. There's imprecise wording, there's things that are honestly up to interpretation, and we try to resolve these with a number of rulings and FAQs and updates and TOs and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, we're kind of just interpreting this kind of scripture and deciding how to play the game moving forwards. So again, difficult to implement because it is so imprecise. 40k also has too much variance in it. Ultimately, we're playing with a D6 system, which has a lot of variance in it. Dice can go hot, dice can go cold, and there's just not enough gameplay to actually shake this out. This is also connected to the fact that it's a very long game. With tournament rounds currently being 3 hours, you can only play one matchup with your opponent, and ultimately, mistakes happen that are absolutely magnified to a huge scale, as well as the fact that you're not able to play multiple rounds. This is something that's common to other games, obviously including esports, where you actually play several reiterations of the game, working through all the different versions, and it kind of irons out some of the variations or randomness that can happen in a particular game. So this is something we just can't do with Warhammer. You need a much shorter game to be able to play at least 3 rounds to come to a definitive winner for a specific matchup. Next up, we have the constant rules updates. This game is seeing many rules introduced on a monthly or sometimes weekly basis. Now, while this is something that digital games do have to a certain extent, it ultimately is often a slower pace than we currently have. And as we mentioned, they're implemented by a machine, by the back end, by the game engine, whereas we have to actually update them in real time, and we have to play them for about 2 weeks before we can expect any realistic update to mistakes and things like that. So this is something that has increased over time, is the issue coming from new rules, strange rules interactions, and the interpretation of them. But ultimately, it comes from the massive onslaught of new rules and new updates that we get to the game. Codexes have always had a strange life cycle in the game of Warhammer. In the past, we've had them take a number of years to get updated, and recently we also still seen the fact that they cannot release all the codexes on day one. So what happens? In some cases, we get indexed, where everyone has basically no rules and work our way up. In other cases, you have armies that are sitting for an entire edition with basically the previous version of the book. This, by and large, has to do with production schedules. It does have to do with designs to a certain extent, but really the way that things are developed and designed is just not very sustainable, right? It's more like one-off individual books created by authors, and it does not lend itself well to a competitive, cohesive game that's played over an entire edition as one entire season. So these are the reasons why Warhammer 40k is not a good competitive game. So why do we go to tournaments? Why do we time and time again talk about what's good, what's bad, and practice hours and hours and hours trying to improve our game? Well, ultimately we do love this game, and there's another number of things that are bad for it that also make it a ton of fun to play. First of all, the impreciseness of the game, the physicality of the game is something that you just simply cannot replace. Why are we not all running around with dice apps that roll dice? Well, frankly, we love the physicality of it. We are also hobbyists in many cases. We like to build and paint models, play with them, and see these beautiful spreads in real life. So this big detriment to the game is also one of its biggest strengths, and it's one of the reasons that we keep coming back to it time and time again. What about the other imprecise parts about the game? The fact that we have to know our rules, that we have to interact with our opponent's rules without always being familiar with them. Well, ultimately this also comes from it being a social game. This is about people coming together, rolling dice, chatting, discussing, and all of this is something that's actually very interesting, compelling to the game. Again, If this was all automated for us, there'd be much less reason to chit-chat during a game, and it would ultimately be much less social. So again, it's a big negative for the competitive aspects of the game, but it really is a big plus for why we play these games. So ultimately, this weakness is still a strength, and it just keeps coming back. The constant rules changes. If you've been playing Warhammer long enough, you've been around to remember the times when it was years and years between new codexes. You could make the claim that this would make it much easier to balance the game, as it was a much slower pace, and over the course of a year, you would really get a sense for how the meta plays, how the armies play, and it wouldn't change that much, which can create a lower barrier to entry. However, I will say that having all these different updates, patching things, adjusting things, is really fun and really great for the competitive scene in the sense that we are getting updates faster than ever, and it keeps the game fresh and interesting. Look, things get shaken up, something's going to be broken at any one given moment, and while I would rather not have that happen, I would rather deal with that and have a game that is constantly being updated and changed than have a stagnant game that doesn't change for years and years and years. So again, these fresh releases constantly create new problems for us as players, and for me at least, I find that to be fun and compelling, even if it isn't the best thing for competitive play. And this last positive is not really related to any of the problems with Warhammer, but it does kind of tie in all these reasons that we keep coming back and playing it. And these are the amazing stories that we build with ourselves, with our opponents, with the community. Time and time again, I come to tournaments to see friends, make new ones, and just chit-chat, hang out, roll dice, and talk about the game and the lore that we love. So ultimately, I think competitive play is kind of an excuse to have everyone come to the table with an agreed set of rules, have a great time, celebrate Warhammer, celebrate what we do, and just have a good time. So this is the reason why, ultimately, 40K is not a good competitive game, but we love it and we still keep coming back to it time and time again. Let us know in the comments below, of course, what your thoughts are on. Are there any other issues with 40K competitive play that you see? And ultimately, why do you still keep coming back and playing it? And after this video, are you maybe a little bit more interested in playing competitive play despite knowing its weaknesses? That's gonna do it for me. I'll catch you all next time on the tabletop. Bye!